In January of 1993, at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, a small crowd gathered around a prototype console that no one in the games industry had ever seen anything like. Industry analysts who watched the demonstration described graphical capabilities that looked unprecedented compared to anything on the market, console or computer. By the end of that year, Time magazine would name it Product of the Year. 9 months later, it launched to the public at a price of $699. Within 3 years, it was gone. Every week we tell the stories of the consoles, studios, and engineering decisions that shaped the video game industry, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins with a man who had already built one of the most successful companies in the industry and decided to leave it behind entirely. Trip Hawkins founded Electronic Arts in 1982 and built it into one of the dominant publishers in American gaming. In 1991, at the height of that success, he stepped down as EA's CEO to start something new, a company that wouldn't just publish games, but would define the hardware standard the entire next generation of games would run on. Hawkins had a specific model in mind, borrowed deliberately from outside the games industry. He looked at how VCRs worked. No single company manufactured every VCR on the market. Sony, Panasonic, and a dozen other manufacturers all built machines to a shared technical standard, competed with each other on price and features, and consumers benefited from that competition. Hawkins wanted to do the same thing for video game consoles. His company, the 3DO Company, would not build hardware itself. It would design the specification and license it to electronics manufacturers who would build and sell the actual machines. For the hardware itself, Hawkins turned to two engineers he already knew, Dave Needle and R.J. Mickle, who had previously designed the Atari Lynx handheld. According to Hawkins, their original concept had been sketched out on a restaurant napkin back in 1989. When Hawkins started 3DO, he found their existing design philosophy already matched what he wanted to build, and rather than starting a new engineering team from scratch, he brought them on to shape their concept into the console that would carry his name into the market. Hawkins approached nearly every major electronics manufacturer to license the design, but his primary targets were the two largest consumer electronics companies in the world, Sony and Matsushita, the parent company of Panasonic. Sony would go on to build its own console independently within a few years. Panasonic said yes. The licensing terms were structured to appeal directly to software publishers, not just hardware manufacturers, where Nintendo and Sega charged game publishers substantial royalties for every cartridge or disc sold on their platforms. 3DO's royalty was set at just $3 per game, a fraction of what publishers were used to paying. It was on paper a compelling pitch, an open platform, multiple manufacturers competing for the consumer's dollar, and a friendlier deal for the people making the games. But that same royalty structure created a problem Hawkins had not fully accounted for. In the traditional console business, manufacturers like Nintendo and Sega sold their hardware at or near cost, sometimes even at a loss, because they made their real profit from the royalties on every game sold for the system. That loss on hardware was the price of building a large installed user base, and the software royalties made up the difference many times over. 3DO's royalty structure broke that model. Because the licensing fees flowing back to 3DO from software sales were so minimal, Panasonic had no equivalent royalty stream to offset a loss on hardware. If Panasonic wanted to make any profit on the 3DO business at all, that profit needed to come from the console itself, not from games sold later. That is why the first 3DO console, Panasonic's FC1 model, launched in North America on October 4, 1993, at $699.99. Adjusted for inflation, that is well over $1,500 today. At the same Consumer Electronics Show where the prototype had wowed audiences with its graphics, the actual retail price of admission was already effectively pricing out the mainstream gaming audience the console needed to succeed. The hardware itself was genuinely capable for its era. The FZ1 ran on a 32-bit custom RISC processor, supported over 16 million colors, included Dolby surround sound, and could daisy-chain up to 8 controllers together for multiplayer gaming, all built around CD-ROM discs rather than cartridges. On pure technical specifications, in October of 1993, there was very little on the consumer market that could compete with it. None of that mattered if almost no one could afford to buy one. Sales in the console's first holiday season were mixed. Reports from the period describe Panasonic backordering 40,000 console units and 150,000 software items by mid-February of 1994 on advance orders, with some retailers discounting the console to $425 just to move inventory. Software support was building too. Japanese publishers including Capcom, Konami, Taito, Koei, Bandai, and Tomy signed on to bring games to the platform following a stronger-than-expected launch in the Japanese market. But the fundamental math of the business had not changed. Every unit Panasonic sold at that price point either barely broke even or lost money outright once component and manufacturing costs were factored in, and the console still needed a far larger install base to convince major third-party publishers to commit serious development resources. By mid-1994, the price had dropped to $499. In late 1994, a second manufacturer entered the market under 3DO's licensing model exactly as Hawkins had envisioned. GoldStar, the Korean electronics company that would later become LG, released its own 3DO console, the GPA 101M 3DO multiplayer, priced at $399 and distributed through retailers. This was the open platform competition Hawkins had promised. It was also where the licensing model's second fatal flaw became impossible to ignore. Unlike Panasonic, GoldStar had no existing software publishing arm to fall back on. When the price war among 3DO manufacturers accelerated and GoldStar's console price dropped to $199 by December of 1995, the company was losing more than $100 on every single unit sold, with no meaningful software royalty stream to offset it. GoldStar attempted to pivot toward the traditional industry model, selling hardware at a loss and publishing its own software to recoup the difference, but its software development effort arrived too late to make any real difference. Meanwhile, the console market itself had fundamentally shifted underneath the entire 3DO platform. In late 1994 and through 1995, the Sega Saturn and Sony PlayStation both launched, at price points at or below $300, backed by publishing relationships, first-party development studios, and marketing budgets that dwarfed anything 3DO's licensing model could generate. The 3DO's technical advantages, so striking at that Consumer Electronics Show in January of 1993, had been matched and then surpassed within 2 years by console makers who understood something Hawkins' model never fully solved. Someone in the value chain needs a direct financial incentive to subsidize the hardware price, and under 3DO's structure, nobody truly did. Panasonic began development on a successor system, codenamed M2, intended to leapfrog the coming generation entirely. In a move that effectively ended any remaining cooperation between the licensees, Panasonic acquired exclusive rights to the M2 technology in early 1996. Cutting GoldStar and Sanyo, GoldStar dropped its support for the 3DO shortly afterward. The M2 project itself was ultimately shelved before ever reaching consumers, sold off in pieces to other companies. By the end of 1996, the 3DO company shut down all internal hardware development entirely. The console that had been Time magazine's Product of the Year in 1993 was, within 3 years, sitting in discount bins in electronics stores across the country, its remaining inventory liquidated alongside its unrealized successor. Total lifetime sales estimates for the 3DO vary depending on the source, with figures ranging from roughly 1.4 million to 2 million units sold worldwide across all manufacturers combined. Whichever figure is accurate, it placed the 3DO well behind the Sega Saturn's 9.26 million units, and further still behind the PlayStation's eventual sales exceeding 100 million. The console's best-selling game, the platformer Gex, sold over 1 million copies, becoming something of a bright spot in an otherwise difficult software business. EA's FIFA International Soccer and Capcom's Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo both crossed 200,000 units, respectable numbers that nonetheless illustrated just how small the total addressable install base had become. Trip Hawkins would go on to found other companies after 3DO, including Digital Chocolate, but he never again attempted to build console hardware. The open licensing model he pioneered, treating a game console like a VCR or a DVD player, has never been successfully replicated by a major games company since. Every dominant console released in the decades that followed, from the PlayStation to the Xbox to the Nintendo Switch, has come from a single manufacturer, selling hardware at a controlled loss, recouping that investment through the software royalties Hawkins had specifically designed the 3DO to minimize. The napkin sketch that became the FZ1 proved that a small engineering team could build genuinely groundbreaking console hardware ahead of its time. What it could not prove was that an entirely new business model, one explicitly built to reward everyone in the chain except the hardware manufacturer taking on the financial risk, could survive contact with a market where two much larger, much better-funded rivals were about to prove the old model still worked. The 3DO didn't lose because the hardware was weak. It lost because Trip Hawkins tried to change the rules of an industry that, as it turned out, was not ready to play a different game.